Driving at night had always been my escape from insomnia and the solitude that haunted my home. On a particularly foggy evening, with visibility limited and an unsettling chill in the air, I drove down the familiar winding roads of the countryside. The radio played static-infused music, occasionally interrupted by bursts of distorted voices, adding to the eerie atmosphere. I was lost in thought when I saw her, a silhouette barely visible through the dense mist, standing motionless at the roadside. My instinct screamed for me to keep driving, but empathy overcame caution. As I slowed down, the figure became clearer. A young woman, dressed inadequately for the cold, staring blankly ahead. She made no gesture to flag me down, yet something compelled me to stop. I rolled down the window slightly and asked if she needed a ride. Her pale face turned slowly toward me, eyes reflecting oddly in the dim headlights. Without a word, she opened the door and climbed silently into the back seat. Immediately, a damp, earthy scent filled the car, and a shiver ran down my spine. I hesitated before accelerating again, glancing at her reflection in the rearview mirror. "Where can I take you?" I asked, trying to mask the unease in my voice. Silence filled the car, heavy and oppressive. I repeated my question, louder this time, yet she remained mute, her gaze fixed straight ahead. The unease began to turn into a gnawing dread as I noticed her reflection distorted strangely in the mirror, her features unclear, blurred by some trick of the dim lighting. Attempting to quell my growing anxiety, I focused on the road ahead. The silence was occasionally punctuated by faint sighs or gasps from behind me, each sound sending a wave of cold dread down my back. When I dared another look in the mirror, her eyes met mine, utterly empty and pitch black, voids of nothingness staring back at me. My heart nearly stopped. Panicked, I jerked the car to the side of the road, gravel crunching beneath the tires. When I turned around, breathing heavily and trembling, the back seat was empty. The door was closed, and there was no sign of the mysterious passenger. Confused and terrified, I searched around the vehicle, the fog swallowing any visibility. My rational mind tried desperately to make sense of what had happened, yet no explanation seemed plausible. Returning to my empty car, I continued home, shaken and uncertain. Over the days and weeks that followed, I convinced myself it had been a stress-induced hallucination. But something had undeniably changed. Each night when I drove, an undeniable feeling of another presence lingered. Silent, watchful, just behind me. Soon the sensation was accompanied by fleeting glimpses in mirrors and reflections, distorted faces and shadowy figures. My sleep became plagued by nightmares of the woman from the roadside, her empty eyes haunting my every thought. I delved into local history and discovered unsettling reports of similar sightings, stretching back decades. Each encounter was eerily identical. A silent passenger vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but dread. My obsession grew, affecting my work, relationships, and sanity. I had to understand the truth. I started spending my nights retracing the roads, desperately searching for her again, determined to confront this apparition. One fateful night, she finally reappeared, exactly where I'd first found her. This time, as she climbed into the car, I demanded answers. "Who are you? What do you want from me?" My voice trembled despite my resolve. Slowly, she turned her head, the black void of her eyes consuming my courage. Her voice emerged, whisper thin and filled with sorrow. "Take me home," she murmured. a single tear sliding down her ghostly cheek. Driven by compulsion, I obeyed her vague directions, venturing deeper into the countryside until we reached an abandoned, decrepit farmhouse hidden among overgrown trees. She stepped from the car, her feet leaving no mark in the wet grass. Hesitantly, I followed as she led me inside, each creak of the ancient floorboards echoing like a warning. Inside, illuminated by moonlight, filtering through broken windows, memories of pain and sadness overwhelmed me. Memories not my own. Suddenly, I understood. This was her home, where tragedy had bound her restless spirit. "Release me," she whispered. Her plea resonated deeply within me. Guided by her spectral presence, I unearthed a forgotten diary hidden beneath rotting floorboards. As I read the pages filled with anguish and fear, I discovered the truth: her tragic death, betrayal, and decades-long torment that had trapped her soul. With compassion overcoming fear, I vowed to set her free, burying her memories in the diary beneath the ancient oak in the yard. As dawn broke, a gentle wind swept through the trees, whispering gratitude. Her spirit faded, leaving behind only peace. I never saw her again, but the haunting experience changed me forever. The passenger had been more than just a ghostly hitchhiker. She was a call for redemption, forgiveness, and release. Though the nights still unsettle me, the knowledge that I had helped set her free gives me comfort in the lingering darkness. Room 206. Exhausted by the relentless demands of my life in the city, I sought refuge and solitude at the remote Willow Creek Lodge, nestled deep in the snow-capped mountains. Upon arrival, the rustic charm of the lodge immediately enveloped me, though the peculiar glances and muted warnings from locals about Room 206 set me slightly on edge. Still, I dismissed their superstitions, eager for the isolation promised by my chosen retreat. Initially, Room 206 appeared welcoming. Its antique furnishings, plush rugs, and the comforting warmth of a fireplace seemed to embody the tranquility I sought. But gradually, an unsettling heaviness descended, barely noticeable at first, yet increasingly oppressive. The air felt thick, saturated with a sense of sorrow I could neither explain nor shake off. On my second night, restless sleep gave way to an eerie awakening. Soft sobbing, barely audible yet unmistakable, seemed to emanate from the closet. Heart pounding, I approached cautiously and opened the door, only to find emptiness. Yet the sobbing persisted, echoing now from the opposite corner of the room. As I spun around, my eyes caught a fleeting glimpse of a hunched, shadowy figure near the bed, vanishing before I could fully grasp its presence. The following nights intensified my growing dread. Sleep became impossible as shadows moved in peripheral vision, whispers of despair permeating every corner of the room. The sobbing evolved into desperate pleas, fragmented and anguished, yet indecipherable. Each night, the figure appeared more defined, lingering longer, always retreating into darkness before I could confront it fully. Driven by curiosity, mingled with dread, I delved into the history of the lodge. Local records and dusty newspaper archives revealed a tragic tale from decades earlier. A young woman named Eleanor, a guest at the lodge, had mysteriously vanished from Room 206, her disappearance unresolved and her body never found. Locals whispered of betrayal, heartbreak, and a sorrow so profound It lingered long after Eleanor had vanished. Resolute yet terrified, I spent my days piecing together Eleanor's story. Interviews with elderly villagers painted a picture of a young woman betrayed by her lover, her life unraveling tragically during her stay at the lodge. Her sorrow, they believed, bound her spirit eternally to room 206. Armed with newfound understanding and empathy, I decided to face Eleanor's restless spirit directly. On my final night, as darkness enveloped the lodge, I spoke aloud, addressing her by name, acknowledging her pain, and expressing genuine compassion. The atmosphere thickened, and Eleanor's spirit materialized fully before me, her form translucent, yet clearly visible. Her eyes, filled with infinite sadness, met mine, silently communicating gratitude for the recognition she had long awaited. With a gentle smile, she reached out, and I extended my hand instinctively, feeling a rush of icy air. A profound sense of peace filled the room as Eleanor's figure gradually faded, leaving behind an aura of calmness I had not felt since my arrival. The oppressive heaviness lifted instantly, replaced by tranquility and resolution. Leaving Willow Creek Lodge, I felt forever changed. My encounter in room 206 taught me the profound importance of empathy and understanding, offering solace not only to Eleanor's restless spirit, but also providing unexpected healing and clarity to my own restless heart. Felt warmer, more inviting. I knew the spirit had moved on, finally released from the grip of betrayal. The forgotten photograph. When my grandmother passed away, leaving me her sprawling, old Victorian home, I felt an immediate sense of duty and nostalgia. The house, filled with cherished memories from my childhood, had always felt warm and welcoming, until now. As I stepped through the threshold, the familiar creaking floors and musty air felt strangely oppressive, as if holding their breath in anticipation. My first days were spent sorting through decades of belongings, dusting furniture, and exploring forgotten corners. It was during one of these explorations that I stumbled upon an old chest tucked away in the attic. Inside, among various trinkets, was a photograph yellowed with age. The image depicted my grandmother standing next to a man whose face was blurred, distorted inexplicably. My curiosity quickly turned to discomfort, though I couldn't understand why. That night, the atmosphere of the house shifted dramatically. Whispers floated through the halls, soft yet urgent, carrying fragments of conversations lost to time. The attic above my bedroom creaked continuously, as though pacing footsteps wandered aimlessly. My sleep was plagued with vivid nightmares of the man from the photograph, his distorted face twisted in anger and despair. The photograph haunted me, appearing inexplicably in different locations around the house. Each time, the man's face became clearer, his eyes more intense, staring accusingly into my very soul. Desperate for answers, I began digging through my grandmother's personal papers and diaries, uncovering letters hidden beneath layers of dust. Through these letters, I learned the man's name was Joseph, someone deeply loved by my grandmother before she married my grandfather. Their romance had been intense, but ended abruptly, with betrayal and heartache. Joseph had vanished mysteriously soon after, and rumors swirled about his tragic fate. Determined to resolve this haunting, I reached out to elderly neighbors who reluctantly shared old village gossip. They spoke of whispers surrounding Joseph's sudden disappearance, how he was last seen in heated argument with my grandmother. Fueled by these revelations, I continued searching, eventually discovering a hidden compartment behind the attic's old bookshelf. Inside were more letters, full of raw emotion and accusations. The final letter ended abruptly, stained with what appeared to be tears, or perhaps something darker. This discovery intensified the hauntings, Joseph's spirit now openly appearing, demanding acknowledgement. Realizing the depth of the tragedy and unresolved pain, I decided to hold a private ceremony to bring closure. Under the moonlit sky, in the house's sprawling garden, I placed the photograph alongside the letters, speaking words of peace and forgiveness. As the flames consumed these relics, a profound sense of relief enveloped me, and the oppressive presence faded, leaving behind tranquility. From then on, the house returned to the warmth I remembered. Joseph's restless spirit was finally at peace, his painful past acknowledged and laid to rest. In resolving his torment, I found clarity and connection to my grandmother's complex past, forever changing how I viewed my family and myself. Whispers from below. The moment I stepped into the old Victorian house, I felt an unsettling chill crawl up my spine. Initially charmed by its ornate architecture and historical significance, my enthusiasm quickly dimmed as a sense of unease settled over me, especially concerning the basement. Even during daylight hours, the cellar door seemed to exude a sinister presence, quietly lurking at the periphery of my attention. In the quiet hours of the night, whispers began seeping through the heating vents, soft murmurs laced with desperation and urgency. They were indistinct at first, easily dismissed as imagination or house noises, but soon the whispers grew more pronounced, forming words that called my name repeatedly. Sleep became elusive, punctuated by unsettling dreams and shadowy figures, whispering messages I couldn't quite grasp. Driven by both fear and curiosity, I descended into the basement, armed with a flashlight. The air was thick and cold, seemingly resistant to my intrusion. Following the whispers, I was drawn toward a darkened corner behind the rusting boiler. There, beneath loose floorboards, lay an old metal box, rusted and barely holding together. Inside, I found photographs of a smiling family, a child's worn doll, and a diary, its pages yellowed with age and filled with frantic, barely legible writing. Reading the diary by the pale glow of my flashlight, I uncovered the heartbreaking story of Clara, a young girl who had mysteriously disappeared decades earlier. Her family had searched tirelessly, but Clara was never found, plunging them into grief and suspicion. Soon after, tragedy struck the family, leaving behind a dark legacy that had seemingly seeped into the very foundations of the house. Clara's presence became impossible to ignore. Her soft, pleading voice invaded my dreams, guiding me toward the truth hidden within the basement's shadowed confines. I pored through local archives, finding newspaper clippings and records that painted a tragic tale. Clara's parents, devastated and shrouded in scandal, eventually left the house abandoned, their fate grim and unresolved. With growing dread, I returned to the basement, compelled by the diary's cryptic clues. Behind an oddly placed wall, I discovered a bricked-up alcove. As I carefully broke through, my horror intensified, with each brick removed. Hidden within the confined space were Clara's remains, her tiny skeleton clutching the very doll I had found earlier. It was clear she'd been sealed away alive, the ultimate victim of a cruel, inexplicable crime. Determined to give Clara the peace she deserved, I arranged a quiet ceremony in the home's garden, beneath a blooming cherry tree. So with gentle reverence, I laid her remains to rest, speaking words of comfort and release. As I finished, the oppressive atmosphere instantly lifted, replaced by a gentle, warm breeze and the distant, unmistakable laughter of a child. From that day forward, the whispers ceased entirely. The house transformed from a place of dread into a sanctuary filled with peace and warmth. Clara's restless spirit, finally acknowledged and honored, had found peace, and I too felt deeply changed, forever mindful of the fragile boundary between past and present.
The Blood Orchard. I never intended to return to the remote village where I'd spent my childhood summers, but an urgent family matter left me no choice. Memories flooded back as I drove down familiar roads flanked by dense, twisted forests. The old farmhouse appeared abandoned, its paint peeling, windows broken, and yard overgrown with weeds. Inside, an overpowering smell of rot filled the air. As I moved cautiously through the rooms, memories of whispered tales and dark folklore about the surrounding orchards resurfaced. Locals had always warned us to avoid the orchard after dark, but now, curiosity compelled me to investigate. That evening, armed with a flashlight, I ventured into the orchard. The trees twisted grotesquely, branches like skeletal fingers grasping the twilight. Soon, my flashlight revealed something horrifying. Trees dripping with a dark, viscous liquid, unmistakably blood. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backward, tripping over roots and landing in a shallow ditch. My hands touched something cold and clammy. Turning, I screamed. A decaying corpse lay half buried, face twisted in a permanent expression of terror. Scrambling to my feet, I discovered more bodies hidden amongst the roots, each more decomposed than the last. Terrified, I tried to flee, but disoriented, I only plunged deeper into the orchard's twisted heart. Strange whispers surrounded me, growing louder, urging violence and madness. The trees seemed alive, their branches moving, scratching, tearing at my skin. Desperately fighting for survival, I followed a faint glow, emerging at the orchard's center, a grotesque altar surrounded by symbols etched into the soil, stained red. At its center stood a figure shrouded in dark robes, chanting incoherently, hands dripping with blood. Realizing I'd interrupted a monstrous ritual, I tried to retreat silently, but the robed figure turned suddenly, revealing a face twisted by madness. It lunged at me, knife gleaming in moonlight, screaming accusations and curses. We grappled fiercely, blood mixing with earth, until I overpowered my assailant, the knife clattering away. Breathless, trembling, I stumbled away from the altar, escaping the orchard's deadly grip. Days later, authorities unearthed dozens of bodies, revealing decades of unspeakable rituals hidden beneath the orchard's twisted roots. The village, forever scarred, whispered of evil long after I fled, haunted by memories and nightmares that never faded. The haunted ruins of Corregidor. Growing up in the bustling streets of Manila, I'd heard countless tales of ghostly encounters on the island of Corregidor, a historic fortress site famous for its wartime past. Skeptical but intrigued, I joined a group of friends for an overnight exploration to satisfy our curiosity about the supernatural legends surrounding the ruins. The ferry ride to Corregidor was smooth, but as we approached, dark clouds gathered ominously overhead, casting an eerie shadow on the island. Upon arrival, the once proud fortifications and bomb-scarred barracks loomed silently, their decaying facades whispering untold stories of tragedy and loss. As night fell, we set up our makeshift camp inside a derelict building. Almost immediately, an unsettling chill filled the air, and a sense of being watched crept over us. Ignoring our unease, we ventured out into the darkness, guided only by flashlights and courage, bolstered by bravado. We wandered through tunnels, where walls echoed softly, with what sounded like distant sobbing. Our laughter quickly faded, replaced by nervous glances and whispers of uncertainty. Deep within the maze of underground corridors, a blood-curdling scream erupted from the darkness, scattering our group in panic. Separated from my friends, I found myself alone in a narrow passage, flashlight flickering erratically. Suddenly, a cold hand brushed my shoulder, spinning me around. Before me stood a spectral soldier, his uniform tattered, eyes hollow and filled with sorrow, whispering incomprehensible pleas. Terrified, I fled deeper into the ruins, stumbling upon a chamber filled with faded photographs, rusted medals, and blood-stained uniforms. As my flashlight illuminated the room, figures appeared, ghostly remnants of fallen soldiers, their forms wavering like mist. Their haunted gazes pierced my soul, their silent screams reverberating within my mind. Desperately trying to escape, I ran blindly, hearing my friends' distant shouts, urging me onward. Reuniting, we raced toward the shore, pursued by shadows and whispers that grew louder with each frantic step. Just as dawn broke, we reached the dock, breathless and traumatized. Leaving Corregidor behind, none of us spoke, each privately haunted by visions of anguished spirits trapped within their eternal torment. The island's dark history had become horrifyingly real, forever etched in our minds, reminding us always of the unseen horrors lurking in places steeped with tragedy.